Picture this. You are a lower-class citizen in the United States of America. You work full-time at a fast food restaurant, and you barely have enough money to put food on the table every day. One day, out of nowhere, you're accused of murder and indicted on the charge of second-degree murder. What happens to you if you can't afford a lawyer to represent you and argue for your innocence in court? What happens to people when they are accused of a crime, but they can't afford an attorney? Well, that's where public defense comes into play. According to the Legal Information Institute, a public defender is a lawyer appointed by the court and paid by the county, state, or federal government to represent clients who are charged with violations of criminal law and are unable to pay for their own defense. So where did this system of public defense come from? Well, chances are, if you grew up in the American education system, you've heard of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, which clearly state the rights of each and every American citizen. You all know about the First Amendment, but the lesser-known Sixth Amendment actually provides a very important constitutional right to Americans, the right to an attorney. The Sixth Amendment states that, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which districts shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. But citizens weren't always guaranteed a public defender in the United States. It wasn't until 1963, when the landmark Supreme Court case Gideon versus Wainwright was decided, that public defense systems were officially established in America. Here's what happened. Clarence Earl Gideon was charged in Florida State Court with felony breaking and entering. When he appeared in court without a lawyer, Gideon requested that the court appoint one for him. However, according to Florida state law at the time, an attorney could only be appointed to a defendant in capital cases, so the trial court did not appoint one. As a result, Gideon represented himself in trial and was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Gideon filed a petition in the Florida Supreme Court, arguing that the trial court's decision violated his constitutional right to be represented by counsel. The Florida Supreme Court denied his motion, and the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, where 9 justices unanimously ruled that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the accused the right to a state-appointed lawyer in all criminal prosecutions and requires courts to provide counsel for defendants unable to hire or afford counsel unless they voluntarily choose to give up their right to a lawyer. This case established precedent for how public defense systems were supposed to work and ensured that every American citizen would receive a lawyer in court, even if they couldn't afford one. This all sounds very great, but there are actually a lot of problems hidden in our justice system that make public defense ineffective at times. Out of these problems, the biggest is budget. About 80% of all indigent defendants need public defenders. We spend an estimated $265 billion annually on state and federal criminal justice systems, and out of this $265 billion, only about $5 billion, or less than 2% of it, goes towards public defenders. In fact, the average salary for a public defender in the United States is about $60,000 per year, while private criminal defense attorneys make an average of $118,000 per year, almost double what a public defender makes. This massive pay gap encourages lawyers to join private practices and discourages them from joining public defense offices, leading to a massive shortage of public defenders and resulting in ridiculously high caseloads for people who do choose public defense. Additionally, private attorneys have the privilege of being able to choose which cases they do or don't want to take on, allowing them to have much higher success rates on their record than most public defenders. This means that by choosing to become a public defender, you are giving up half of your annual salary for a more demanding job with less benefits, higher stress levels, and a lower case success rate. The other big issue is the rising number of criminal defendants in our justice system. As of June 2020, the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world, with 655 prisoners per 100,000 of the national population. There are roughly 2.2 million people in our prisons and jails, which represents a 500% increase over the past 40 years. This is mostly due to the Reagan administration's policy changes on what does or does not constitute a jail time crime. As since the official beginning of the war on drugs in the 1980s, the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses in the U.S. skyrocketed from 40,900 in 1980 to 452,964 in 2017. Today, there are more people behind bars for a drug offense than the number of people who were in prison or jail for any crime in 1980. Additionally, harsh sentencing laws like mandatory minimums combined with cutbacks in parole release keep people in prison for longer periods of time. The National Research Council reported that half of the 222% growth in the state prison population between 1980 and 2010 was due to an increase of time served in prison for all offenses. There has also been a historic rise in the use of life sentences. 1 in 9 people in prison is now serving a life sentence, nearly a third of whom are sentenced to life without parole. This rise in crime is the main cause for the high caseloads that public defenders have to deal with. In many cases, public defenders simply just don't have the time or resources to do a good enough job of representing their client on every single case. As a result, many public defenders will try to get their clients to take guilty pleas, even in cases where they know they are not guilty. As you can see, the main issue with our system is that we have a high demand for public defenders and too low of a supply of them to fulfill the needs of every defendant. So how can we solve these two major issues? In 2 ways, by increasing public defense budgets and decreasing criminal defendants who need public defenders. Budget-wise, a major problem is that many states choose to underfund their public defense systems or fail to provide a statewide public defense system at all. This means that in some states, like Texas for example, each individual county is responsible for funding their own public defense programs, where income inequality impacts each county system differently. Richer counties are able to provide better salaries for their public defenders, leading to a higher supply of them and lower caseloads for each one. Meanwhile, in poorer counties, public defenders are paid much lower wages and receive much higher caseloads. This further divides communities by their economic class and is counterproductive, since poorer communities are the ones who have higher crime rates in the first place. A potential solution for this could be making it mandatory for every state to provide a statewide public defense system. This is difficult since some Americans might see this as an overreach of the federal government's power according to the Constitution. However, there may be a way around this, suing states for higher budgets. In 2006, a statewide study found New York's public defender system to be severely dysfunctional, and a civil liberties group later sued. The state ended up settling and went on to begin funding a statewide public defense system with a projected annual cost of $250 million starting in 2023. To decrease criminals serving jail time, we must consider that a large portion of criminals are in jail for non-violent offenses, most of which are drug-related charges. Instead of punishing addicts for their behavior, why not provide rehabilitation programs to help them recover from their addiction? Lowering the criteria for jail time offenses by decriminalizing drug offenses and assigning a social worker rather than a public defender to help them can be greatly beneficial to communities. And if we shift a small portion of our funds away from prisons, prosecution, and police, we can spend more on community-based programs like rehab and education, which will ultimately lead to more trust between the community and their justice system and lower crime rates all around. We also have to understand that many criminals are repeat offenders because of their inability to turn their life back around after they are released from prison the first time. We currently have many barriers in place, such as workplace restrictions, that make it extremely difficult for ex-convicts to find well-paying jobs or even jobs at all. When these people re-enter society, they find themselves to be in a new world where they are no longer accepted as normal citizens, or worse, not even seen as human beings. Removing these barriers can help ex-convicts adjust back to normal life and encourage them not to commit crimes again, greatly reducing the amount of total prisoners. The bottom line is, instead of punishing nonviolent criminals, we should encourage them to become contributing members of society again through the funding of social programs rather than prosecutorial programs. And we must encourage more lawyers to become public defenders by establishing more uniform, well-funded public defense systems. But you don't have to be a lawyer to contribute. You can contribute by going to the polls and voting for a representative who you believe will fix the issues in your community that you care most deeply about. Many Americans think that they can just get into politics every 4 years when there is a presidential election, but local and state elections are almost just as effective as contributors to direct change. So if you want to make a difference, go out and vote. It's the easiest way we can change this country for the better.